Picture this: the streets are silent, buildings crumbling, and the air thick with a strange, invisible danger. Once a bustling city, Pripyat now lies frozen in time, its amusement parks and schools abandoned overnight. The radioactive cloud that swept across Chernobyl changed everything in an instant. Imagine walking through empty classrooms, shattered windows and playgrounds overtaken by weeds, knowing that a disaster of unimaginable scale has left the city haunted not just by the living, but by invisible death itself. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, releasing a deadly cloud of radiation over the surrounding towns and villages. Pripyat, home to tens of thousands of plant workers and their families, was evacuated within hours, leaving homes, schools and businesses frozen in the chaos of abandonment. The Soviet government initially tried to downplay the disaster, but soon the scale became impossible to hide. Radiation poisoned the land, animals and people, creating a modern ghost town. Decades later, the area remains largely uninhabited, yet the stories of those who lived, worked and died during the catastrophe linger, echoing through the empty streets and overgrown playgrounds. Experts warn that the psychological, ecological and societal consequences of the Chernobyl disaster continue to be felt today, making it one of the most haunting reminders of humanity's vulnerability to technological failure and human error. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video and share your feedback in the comments. The morning of April 26, 1986 began like any other in the town of Pripyat, with children heading to school, workers walking toward the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and families going about their routines, unaware that the world they knew was about to vanish in a cloud of radioactive horror. The explosion at reactor number 4 sent a deadly plume into the sky, invisible to the eye, yet lethal beyond imagination. Imagine standing in the streets, feeling an unexplainable heat, watching a column of fire erupt from the reactor, and realizing that the air you breathe has already begun to steal the life from your body. Emergency crews arrived within moments, unaware of the true danger, rushing into a burning building filled with lethal radiation. The first responders, the firefighters and plant workers, became the immediate victims, exposed to levels of radiation so intense that their flesh blistered and organs failed within hours or days. Their heroism was unparalleled, yet unknowingly fatal. They fought not just fire, but an invisible killer that would claim their lives silently and with terrifying efficiency. Meanwhile, in Pripyat, residents went about their day, children played outside and parents prepared lunches, all completely unaware that the invisible cloud of death was descending upon them. The government delayed evacuation, downplaying the severity of the disaster, and many citizens were exposed to lethal doses before being moved to temporary shelters. Imagine walking through your home feeling completely fine, yet every breath, every touch, every moment is slowly poisoning you from the inside. Victims described nausea, hair loss and bleeding that would manifest over days, yet these were only the first signs of a longer, darker toll. The radioactive fallout did not discriminate. It poisoned the land, the rivers, the animals, and ultimately, the people. Food became contaminated, water carried invisible toxins, and the once thriving farms surrounding Pripyat turned barren. Villagers who attempted to return for personal belongings often became sick, their bodies succumbing to radiation in horrifying ways. Hospitals were overwhelmed with patients showing symptoms that doctors struggled to understand. The Soviet bureaucracy, struggling with the unprecedented scale of the disaster, often delayed treatment, withheld information, and attempted to maintain a veneer of control even as people were dying from exposure. Families were torn apart, some losing multiple members within weeks, and children who survived often faced lifelong health consequences, including leukemia and thyroid cancer. Experts now analyze these events not just as a technological failure, but as a profound human tragedy, a reminder of how systems of power, secrecy, and hubris can exacerbate natural and technological disasters. Imagine being a parent in Pripyat, unaware that the very air and soil were your enemy, watching children play under skies laced with lethal particles. The psychological toll was as severe as the physical. Fear, grief, and uncertainty haunted survivors for decades. Entire communities were uprooted, streets once filled with laughter and life became silent, buildings standing frozen in time, overgrown with weeds and trees reclaiming the land. People left behind personal belongings, toys and photographs, creating an eerie snapshot of daily life abruptly abandoned. Animals roamed freely, some mutated over time, a living testimony to the lingering radiation. Experts who study the area today describe it as a unique ecological experiment. Despite the radiation, some species have adapted, while humans remain largely absent. Imagine walking through a school, your footsteps echoing across empty hallways, desks still lined with textbooks, and realizing that no one will sit there again for decades. Tourists now visit the site with protective gear, taking photos of a world frozen in horror. Yet the true terror lies not in the visual decay, but in the invisible threat that shaped this ghost town. Survivors recount stories of neighbors falling ill overnight, people who were once healthy suddenly stricken with sickness, and the constant anxiety of not knowing who would be next. Radiation did not respect age, gender, or status. Workers, children, mothers, fathers, anyone could be a victim. The emotional scars were deep. Families mourned silently. Government denial compounded the trauma, and communities struggled to find closure. Imagine the chaos, the confusion, the fear in hospitals overflowing with radiation sickness patients, with doctors trying to treat invisible wounds with limited knowledge, while the world outside remained unaware of the full scope of the disaster. This tragedy also prompted international attention, revealing the extent of nuclear dangers and influencing policies and safety measures worldwide. Yet the human stories, the pain, the survival, the loss, remain at the core of Chernobyl's haunting legacy. Each abandoned street and ruined building carries echoes of lives once lived, decisions made under duress, and consequences that continue to unfold over decades. The disaster is not only a historical event, but a perpetual reminder of vulnerability, resilience, and the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's uncontrollable forces. Experts today study the radiation patterns, the ecological effects, and the psychological aftermath to understand the scale of human suffering, yet statistics cannot fully capture the terror experienced by those who lived it. Imagine witnessing children playing in areas already contaminated, or workers laboring under assumptions of safety, their lives imperceptibly ticking away. Survivor accounts speak of disorientation, loss, and an eerie silence that descended over the city. Life ceased to exist in familiar terms. Normal routines were impossible, and fear permeated every corner of the evacuated zone. The scale of exposure was unprecedented, making Chernobyl not just a technological disaster but a human horror story of staggering proportions. Those who survived recount visions of deserted streets, homes frozen in time, and the feeling that death lurked in every shadow. The narrative of Chernobyl continues to evolve as researchers, filmmakers, and storytellers uncover layers of suffering, heroism, and the ongoing consequences of the invisible killer that swept through Eastern Europe in 1986. Imagine being a scientist today, measuring radiation levels, knowing that while nature slowly reclaims the land, the human cost is permanent, etched into DNA, memories, and history itself. Victim stories, from first responders to children, illustrate the personal side of a catastrophe that is often reduced to charts and numbers. Each story underscores the horror of a world where life can be extinguished not by fire or sword, but by an unseen, insidious force that corrupts the very essence of existence. The ghost town of Pripyat stands as a stark testament to the fragility of human life, the dangers of unchecked technology, and the enduring consequences of human error. Imagine walking through its streets, the wind carrying a whisper of past lives, and knowing that this silence is not peaceful. It is a reminder of death, radiation, and horror interwoven in every brick, tree, and broken window. Even today, decades later, experts continue to debate the long-term health consequences, the ethical decisions made during the evacuation, and the lessons humanity must learn to prevent such disasters from happening again. But the most haunting truth remains. The lives lost, the families displaced, and the invisible suffering endured cannot be fully measured, making Chernobyl a ghost town not just in geography but in human memory, forever etched into history as a warning and a nightmare. As the radiation spread silently across the surrounding villages, families were forced to abandon everything they had ever known. Imagine parents packing suitcases in a frantic haze, grabbing photographs, clothes, and toys, while the invisible enemy lingered in every corner of their homes. Some villagers hesitated, thinking they could return in a few days, unaware that a few days would turn into decades. Children, oblivious to the danger, played outside one moment and were escorted away by soldiers the next, confused and terrified, not understanding why their streets, schools, and playgrounds would never welcome them again. Evacuation buses carried them to temporary shelters in cities far from the radioactive cloud, but the mental toll was immediate. Families separated, routines destroyed, and the comforting familiarity of home ripped away. Hospitals filled with patients exhibiting strange symptoms: nausea, dizziness, skin burns, hair loss, and hemorrhaging. Doctors struggled to identify the cause, while radiation silently damaged internal organs, making even minor infections potentially lethal. Emergency responders, the brave firefighters who had rushed into the burning reactor, faced the worst exposure, many dying within days from acute radiation syndrome. Imagine being one of these men, trained to battle flames but not an invisible killer that seeps into the bloodstream, destroying cells, organs, and the very essence of life. The Soviet government, wary of panic and international scrutiny, often delayed disclosure, further endangering citizens and spreading confusion. Families received contradictory information. Some told the disaster was minor, others warned to evacuate immediately, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, the abandoned city of Pripyat became a surreal landscape. Empty streets lined with schools, apartments, and shops frozen in the moment of evacuation, the wind carrying the eerie sound of broken windows and shifting debris. Over time, nature began reclaiming the land. Trees grew through floors, animals roamed freely, and the once thriving city slowly decayed into a ghostly museum of human absence. The psychological effects on survivors were immense. Many struggled with guilt, knowing loved ones were exposed, while others feared invisible radiation poisoning their own bodies. The unknown nature of radiation made every cough, every rash, and every ache a source of terror. Experts note that these psychological scars persisted for decades, manifesting in anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. Imagine growing up in temporary shelters, knowing your home may never be safe again, constantly haunted by memories of a city that seemed alive one moment and dead the next. International attention soon focused on Chernobyl, with scientists and journalists traveling to measure the fallout and document the disaster. They described the landscape as surreal, almost apocalyptic, a world where human ambition and error collided with nature in a deadly dance. The lessons learned extended beyond borders, influencing nuclear safety protocols worldwide. Yet the human suffering, the sickened children, grieving families, and lost communities remained the most devastating legacy. Survivors tell stories of small acts of heroism amid chaos. Neighbors helping neighbors evacuate, teachers calming terrified children, and doctors pushing beyond limits to save lives, even when the enemy was invisible and omnipresent. But here's the chilling part. Even decades later, the effects of Chernobyl persist. Radiation has altered genetics, contaminated food chains, and created zones where human habitation is limited for generations. The abandoned hospitals, schools, and amusement parks are stark reminders of the fragile line between normal life and catastrophe. Researchers study the area, observing mutations in plants and animals, yet the most haunting story remains the human one. Thousands of lives interrupted, families displaced, and futures forever altered by the invisible killer that swept across the land in 1986. Imagine walking through a decayed schoolyard with swings swaying in the wind, books strewn across the floor, and realizing that every item tells a story of a childhood lost, a routine destroyed, and a world suddenly gone silent. Communities that once thrived along the Pripyat River were decimated, with entire villages abandoned, crops left to rot, and livestock poisoned by radiation. Attempts to return or salvage property often led to illness, reinforcing the power of this unseen enemy. The disaster also revealed deep flaws in governance, as secrecy and denial initially prevented effective response, exposing citizens to prolonged danger. Survivors recount the fear of returning home, of touching familiar objects that might now be lethal, and the anguish of learning that friends and relatives had succumbed to radiation exposure in the weeks and months following the accident. International aid eventually arrived, bringing medical supplies, expertise, and monitoring, yet the damage had been done. For many, Chernobyl became a permanent scar, a reminder of how human life can be abruptly transformed, destroyed, or threatened by forces beyond comprehension. Imagine being a child, old enough to understand the word radiation, too young to comprehend its consequences, watching adults evacuate homes and possessions, all while knowing that every breath could bring sickness or death. Researchers today study both the environmental and social aftermath, noting that despite the toxicity, wildlife has surprisingly adapted, creating a paradoxical ecosystem where nature flourishes amid the devastation. Experts use Chernobyl to teach lessons about disaster management, nuclear safety, and the psychological toll of catastrophes, but the stories of individual suffering, those who were exposed, lost loved ones, or were displaced, remain the most poignant. Imagine walking through a hospital ward, beds empty yet filled with echoes of pain, nurses recalling patients whose deaths seem sudden and inexplicable, and understanding that statistics cannot convey the horror witnessed by those present. The ghost town stands as both a warning and a memorial, its abandoned structures frozen in a moment of chaos, its empty streets whispering tales of life interrupted. Tourists now visit, taking photos and recording videos, yet the air carries a lingering reminder of the invisible danger that once reigned. Families of survivors continue to struggle with medical, psychological, and economic repercussions, a legacy of trauma that spans generations. Each personal account reinforces the terrifying reality that Chernobyl was not just a technological disaster, but a human tragedy of epic proportions, one where decisions, errors, and misjudgments converged with natural forces to create a catastrophe whose effects continue to ripple today. Imagine being a first responder, firefighter, or plant worker, rushing into the reactor to contain the fire, only to be exposed to lethal doses of radiation in a matter of minutes, knowing each heroic act may be your last. Their courage saved countless lives, yet many paid the ultimate price. Today, scientists, historians, and journalists continue to uncover the layers of suffering and heroism embedded within Chernobyl, reminding us that the disaster was not only a failure of technology, but a stark exposure of human vulnerability. The abandoned city, overgrown streets, and deserted playgrounds bear silent witness to lives forever altered, families torn apart, and communities erased. Every detail, from shattered windows to overgrown sports fields, tells a story of death, radiation, and horror. Imagine hearing survivors recount memories of smoke, sirens, sudden evacuations, and the terrible uncertainty of the unknown, knowing that each breath, each moment carried the weight of invisible danger. Chernobyl is a chilling reminder that human error, combined with technological ambition, can unleash consequences beyond comprehension, leaving a ghost town where life once thrived, now echoing with the voices of the lost, the terrified, and the heroic. Chernobyl's ghost town is more than a desolate landscape. It is a chilling reminder of human fragility, the unseen dangers of technology, and the profound consequences of error and secrecy. The lives disrupted, the families displaced, and the countless victims of radiation are not merely statistics. They are stories of fear, courage, loss, and survival. Walking through the abandoned streets of Pripyat, observing the overgrown playgrounds, crumbling schools, and silent homes, one cannot help but feel the weight of history pressing down, echoing the tragedy that unfolded decades ago. Experts continue to study the ecological recovery, the long-term health impacts, and the social aftermath, but no data can fully capture the psychological scars left on survivors. Their memories, trauma, and resilience speak louder than numbers. Chernobyl teaches us the importance of vigilance, transparency, and humility when dealing with forces beyond our control. It reminds us that human ambition, unchecked or mismanaged, can create nightmares that echo across generations. Most importantly, it underscores the value of life and the invisible threads connecting human actions, nature, and consequences in ways we may never fully comprehend. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what type of stories you'd like to see next. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Share your thoughts below. Your engagement helps us bring more immersive, haunting stories like this straight to you. Let us know how this story impacted you, and which parts of history you want explored in our next videos.